All right, so my name is Bryan Kanney, and I'm Assistant Director for Career Development at the Heller School. I work primarily with students from our global programs, our master level global programs being SID, Global Health, and Conflict Resolution, whereas my colleague Jasmine, who's not here today, works primarily with our PhD, MBA, and MPP students. So it's nice to have you. Thank you for being here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Pabon. I'm one of the international student advisors here at the ISSO. I've been at Brandeis for about almost 2 years now, but I've been working with international students for over 30 years at different schools, and I have a passion for international student advising and also career development on the side. So I'm really happy to be joining with Bryan to make this presentation for you today, and hopefully it will be as interactive as possible so that you can get the information that you need to make your job search successful.
All right, Karen, thank you for being here and thank you for this collaboration.
Thank you.
Okay. There we go. All right, so here's a look at what we can expect today. Just real briefly, I'll give you the rundown and we'll jump right into it. We're gonna have a little bit of a discussion on how the search in the US may be different than perhaps your home country. Moving into potential challenges, right? What are some challenges that you as an international student may endure? Some cultural considerations, right? What cultural pieces should you consider as you go throughout your search? We'll move into sort of the values of your strengths and how to market your strengths in your search. Going to employment authorization, I'll then address sort of top questions we hear or we receive from students about employers or in employment. We'll talk about the importance of sort of backup plans, plan A, plan B, plan C. And then, of course, we're going to leave you with resources and longstanding invitations to our upcoming events. We do have student Q&A listed there at the end, but again, feel free to chat us up as we go throughout the presentation. You don't have to reserve your questions for the end. Okay. All right, Karen.
If you could use the hand raising feature in your Zoom, I'm wondering how many of you have already had the opportunity or experience of searching for a job in the US, internship or any kind of job, even on campus. Anyone? I'm looking for hands. So no one. Okay, good. This is good. Oh, one person. Okay, excellent. Well, good. You can help us then add in your thoughts as we go along. But one of the things that you may find out when you're ready to start the job search is there are many things that you need to consider as an international student. And the first one may even be that the job search itself may be very different in the United States than it is in your home country, because every country and culture has its own dynamics, and some of the things that are true in the US may not be true in your country. For example, in the US, we use a variety of resources for identifying jobs that, does include family and friends, career services, academic mentors, etc. We expect students to be proactive and to be using all the resources that they're given to search for their job. We have a strong emphasis on networking, and you may have heard a little bit about networking. It is very important in other cultures, in some other cultures as well, but it's particularly important here in the United States. And if you're coming in as an international student, you don't have a built-in network like most domestic students do. So it's going to be up to you to build that network. And it takes work and it takes connection. So building that network is one of the jobs. Also, I think that it depends on the culture you're coming from, but the US culture may seem very assertive and very direct. So this is expected when you're looking for a job, this being sure of yourself, showing confidence, having a strong handshake. These are all important signs that, that an employer might be looking for. So this, again, may be very different than your country. Maybe some of you can share some differences if you think of them. But for example, from what I've seen, and this is just in general, I've found that in some other cultures that I've gotten to know the students, sometimes jobs are gotten through family relationships. You know, if you know someone, if you're in a certain strata of the social social levels, you'll have connections, and friends of friends will get you jobs, things like that. Maybe that's just the one resource that you need. Again, you only need one resource rather than using multiple ones. In some cultures, being overly assertive and having too much confidence and selling yourself, or this expression we have in English, say, blowing your own horn, saying how wonderful you are, may seem very, very different and very opposite to what you're doing in your home country, but it's an expectation in the US. The other thing about that I've noticed is that in some other cultures, it's very important to go to school, to come out, to be something specific, to have a title, to be a doctor, to be an engineer, to be a lawyer. Whereas in the United States, where we have a much more stronger emphasis in undergrad in the liberal arts, where you're basically developing all of your different skills to be able to take many different jobs. So you're not specifically going to school from the start for one specific profession. Again, that's a big difference, I think, from what I've seen in the US and other cultures. Does anyone else have any thoughts about differences that they've found or differences that they think they might find? It's helpful if you're interactive, because I'm sure the other students are thinking exactly the same thing as you are. Eunice?
Okay, thank you for sharing that with us. I realized that when I came in as an international student from Ghana and I was looking for campus jobs, I had to do follow-up. I had to be confident enough after applying and then to check up on the managers, those who are actually taking in, to follow up on my application, because I realized I applied to a lot of jobs, but I wasn't getting feedback. So I had to just follow up and find out what is happening. So you have to just be confident. So it's true, the confidence part you're talking about, and being proactive and following up on them shows that you are really serious. And then I think it paid off when I did that and I got the job so on campus. So it's true. Yeah, just wanted to add that.
That's great. The follow-up, exactly. That's true. I mean, I've seen students who will send out, their resume or apply and then just say, oh, well, I never heard from them. And then they just leave it at that. But a follow-up is not anything that would be bad. It wouldn't be seen in a negative light. So that's another thing we could add to this, following up. Anyone else have anything to add? Okay, we can move on. That's up to you, Bryan, to do the switch. Okay, so before I tell you what I think some of the challenges are, I want to pick your brains, because this helps us to, if you have looked for a job, what challenges have you found? And if you haven't looked for a job, what challenges do you think you might find as an international student looking for a job in the US? And of course, I'm assuming that you're all here today because you may be looking for a job at some point in the future. What are the things that you think might be challenging?
If I may speak,
Sure.
I have so much experience in looking for a job in Israel, but because as the previous slide already mentioned, because I don't have any networking here, not friends, not family, I don't even know where to start from.
Right.
Or I assume that the opportunities here are much wider than in Israel, and I don't even know what to imagine that is possible for me, because it's like I'm very inside the cube of whatever I know, and obviously there is much more things to look for, and I don't even know where to start.
Yeah, that's very understandable, and it's not uncommon, and you're not alone. So that hopefully this will help a little bit.
And Karen, someone mentioned in the chat sponsorship as a challenge.
And so immigration issues, definitely huge challenge for international students. But again, we're going to give you some really good resources and some ideas to think about the immigration challenges too. Luckily, those are very, for me, those are the easier of the challenges because they're very concrete. Some of the other challenges are a little harder to identify. What do you think some of the other challenges might be?
Well, I'm guessing definitely when you get to an interview and you need to know how to correctly behave, because what is polite in your idea or in your culture might be very not in the eyes of your potential future employees. So
exactly. How do you interview? How do you come across? How do you communicate? Eunice, what about you? What did you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, if you are switching from one sector to another. So I'm coming from the educational background, like I've been in academia for all this while and learning from SID, and I want to move to like industry and learn more about. So that is a bit of challenge I'm seeing, that how to easily switch and then get to know more about the industry and how to navigate the work market. So that's what I want to add.
Okay, great. Did anyone else want to add? Can you go back one, Bryan? Back one slide?
Yeah, I'm trying. My computer's frozen.
Okay, well, Bryan's trying that. Let's hear from some of you that I haven't heard from yet. Language and culture, exactly. That's in the chat. You know, everyone speaks English really well, or you wouldn't be here, of course. So it's not that you don't speak English, but there are certain language things. There's body languages that you have to deal about. You know, how close you stand to a person when you're talking. You know, what kind of slang you might be using. Whether you're familiar with pop culture to have like that little chit chat that you need to make with a potential employer. You know, are you up on the US pop culture to be able to, or sports things to be able to talk about that in a professional setting. What else? No one else? Well, thank you for those of you that did speak up. And now I'll tell you some of the things that I thought of, or that we thought of together, that you might think about. We mentioned this, the familiarity with the English language relating to conversations in the workplace. So, you know, what if when you're standing around the water cooler chatting with your office mates, what are you going to talk about, you know? I think a lot of cultures have very strong family or even self expectations. If you've given, you know, if it's been your dream to come to the United States to study, you've made a substantial financial investment to do this. So the expectations are high. They're high from your family of what you're going to be able to achieve and what you're going to bring back, and they're high for yourselves because you're giving up or you know, really challenging yourself to be in this position. The cultural and communication styles are the things that I was thinking about, are the more difficult things, because they're kind of invisible and you may not be as aware of them as you are of the very concrete immigration challenges. A lot of different cultures have a very indirect way of communicating. Some cultures will not say no directly. No, I don't want to do that. Or no, I won't be coming to that meeting because I have something else to do. Whereas in the US culture, we really, in general, and I'm generalizing, which is never really a good thing to do, but sometimes it's helpful. We will be more, you know, we will be more direct and believe that the directness is really the best way to go. So if someone isn't answering us directly or isn't looking us in the eyes when they're talking, that could be perceived as something very different than what it is in your culture. So thinking about that is, what's your communication style like, to be more aware of what that is, and then look around and see what the communication style is of the environment you're in. the whole individual versus group dynamic. Again, their US employers really value, and the whole US culture, our history, and everything is based on these strong individuals who came into the United States and worked hard and built themselves up, and really have a passion for leadership and believe that they should always strive to be the best. So this is really important to see, whereas again, in many other cultures, it's more of a community idea. Like, what are we doing as a community? How can we assist the community? How can we support the community? How can this community support us? So these kinds of things play out in the job search and in the employment environment. Does anyone have any other things to add to cultural considerations? Anything you've experienced yourself or? Okay. So then the big one, the one that's more concrete, I think, is immigration. And that seems sometimes to become really a strong barrier for international students. But like I said, that's what our office is here for. We're here to help you understand what the immigration regulations are and to navigate through them. So just understanding the basic status that you have and what kind of work options you do have. Understanding that you're here on a visa that is, the primary purpose is to study, but the options for employment are there as well, especially if you're going to be trying to get practical experience in what you're studying. So practical experience is in your major field of study. There are options for you to work in the United States. But adapting to that restrictiveness of the immigration regulations is hard. And it's something additional that you have to face as an international student that domestic students do not have to face. So along with all the other pressures and things that you're thinking about as you graduate, this is something that you need to think about. Not a semester before you graduate. You have to start thinking about it from the very beginning and planning out your timeline. Because again, once you get the job, it's not always going to coincide with the dates that you can actually get the employment authorization. So careful planning and planning early is really critical. The other thing is sometimes you'll be looking for jobs in places where people aren't used to hiring international students, so they don't really know what it means or what it takes. And the idea of what is sponsorship, for example, that's a very loaded word, sponsorship. That can mean different things to different people. They might think it's impossible to hire an international person because it's just too complicated and I don't want to deal with it. Or if it's a big firm that maybe even has a person on staff that's used to working with all of their international employees, that could be a totally different experience. But the whole myth that you can't get a job in the United States if there's a US person that can fill that position, that's a myth. That's not true. And many employers do believe that that's true. And then there's the cost. Of course, hiring an immigration attorney, if you need to, can be quite costly. We do provide you with guidance here at the international office up to the practical training or the training you get after your degree. But if you're going to go on after that, you're going to need to hire an immigration attorney, and that can be expensive, but could be well worth the investment as well. And then the risks involved, are you going to have to travel home in the middle of this process? What if something happens? And what if your visa has expired? And what if you can't get back in? What if, you have a pandemic? It's very, very difficult, and it's not a sure thing when you're traveling that it's going to be easy to come back. Okay, any questions about that so far? All right.
Okay, it actually let me unmute myself. It's a fun game to play. Okay, so yeah, when I'm thinking about the time search, the timeline and preparation for international students is perhaps longer than domestic students. I would argue still that regardless of when you arrived in the United States to study, your job search actually started already, right? It started before you arrived to campus. So something that I find happens a lot is that students, regardless of domestic or international status, tend to hyper focus on the online job search. And while that is part of the search, there's far more, there are far many more pieces that can be addressed, such as, your resume, your cover letter, developing those networks that Karen had been talking about, taking self-assessment, and determining a way that you're going to market yourself to employers. So there's a lot that you can be doing before the search, the online search. These things don't happen overnight. Networks don't develop overnight. It takes quite a while and some preparation to get all of the parts and pieces into place. Yeah, so somebody just put it in the chat. Oh, okay, thanks, Karen. Yes, so you certainly need more time to plan. And then when we jump down to the unfamiliarity with the US job market, uncertainty about what it takes to secure a job in the US, we're going to address this piece. Employers, well, this bullet point reads heavily focused on the academic goals and may not have socially enmeshed into the US culture. And then thirdly, obtaining and practicing soft skills are critical for the job search success in the United States. So yeah, I just want to jump into these pieces a little bit further. What? Oh my goodness, my computer. Okay, so thinking about it this way, what is one way or that you can really make yourself stand out? How do you differentiate yourself from all other candidates, regardless of domestic or international status, right? So you all are graduating with the same or similar degrees. There's that piece, but how are you going to differentiate yourself from other international candidates who might be applying for the same organizations and the same types of jobs? So what would you say are some of your strengths as an international student? And you have them. You have many strengths.
Yeah, think outside the box and really, like, if you had to brag about yourself.
Emmanuel, give it to me.
So one of the strengths international students have is diversity. So where they come from, regardless of the continent or the country, they have a culture already. And through the time of their study, they have acquired or they have been able to adapt to a new culture. So going to a work environment, they have diversity in terms of culture. So that's one of the strengths I see.
Beautiful.
And another one is depending on the institution where you might have interest or work. If an institution has a link to where you come from or the continent you come from, that again is another strength for you, because you will know exactly what is needed to be done in that country or that place of assignment. So that's another strength I see so far.
Great,
Great.
thank you.
So diversity, adaptability, connection. What else? Go ahead.
I think that coming to the US as a student, whether it's undergrad or graduate student, we face with much more challenges than the American students, because we need to adapt to new environments. We have the language challenge. We need to learn how to get education in a whole new infrastructure, in terms of methods, in terms of the other things we were talking about. The culture is everywhere. So I do think it gives us skills that other students, the American students, do not have. And obviously we develop more resilience through all this process.
Good.
So I definitely think it's something that it's a big strength that we bring with us.
Definitely.
Oh, do you have another, Emmanuel? Yeah.
I just thought on this. I think it is established that most international students that come here, they already have some job experience back home
Mhm.
as compared to some American students I've interacted with. So that's against another strength because you have work experience before, plus coming to acquire additional education so that can help also.
True.
Kaiser?
Hi, I just wanted to ask whether if someone has a diversified international experience of working in different countries, how important that is, would that be here in US in the job search?
Brian, did you want to take that or do you want me to?
You can start if you'd like.
So I think that goes back to the idea of the adaptability element, that if you're able, and your intercultural communication and awareness skills, a lot of employers now in the global economy are looking for people with a very developed intercultural communication and awareness skills. So if you've had experience working in different countries, that's a huge selling point. I mean, I think, but Brian, you may have more to add to that.
No, that you took the words.
Is that what you meant, Kaiser? Is that?
Yeah, that's enough. That's okay.
Great. So when you think about, how do you distinguish yourself? How do you differentiate yourself? You might be thinking, okay, let me take self-inventory and identify my strengths. So is it a lived experience? Is it a language? Is it a soft skill? Is it a hard skill, technical skill? How do I differentiate myself? Well, when we ask, let me go to the next slide when my computer decides it wants to work. There it goes. Okay. The National Association of Colleges and Employers, every year they send surveys to employers to assess what are the skills, what skills are you looking for from candidates, right? So what skills are you looking for in your position descriptions in an ideal candidate? And even though what employers identify changes roughly, or it changes every year, it's just these top 10 kind of reposition themselves, usually in the top 10 somewhere every year. So let's just take a look at them. And some of these that you mentioned are already here, right? So problem solving skills, those analytical skills, ability to work in a team. So in the US, as Karen was mentioning, this sort of individual culture contributing to a team culture, right? Communication is both written and verbal communication, at least in the international space. Most of the position descriptions that I see require or recommend a second language skill. So many of you have that to offer. Certainly leadership, a strong work ethic, the ability to analyze, right? Taking initiative, being detail oriented, and hey, here's another one that we mentioned before, that flexibility and adaptability. So you already have sort of most of these top 10 attributes that NACE is calling attention to. And those skills on the right that we've outlined, so language skills, intercultural awareness, self-awareness, career awareness, courage, all of these are pieces that we believe are skills that are worth mentioning and help to distinguish yourself in your candidacy. Somebody put something in the chat. Okay. Move on to the next slide when my computer works. Here it goes.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about employment authorization. So this is what we were referring to as the immigration challenges. So many of you may already be aware that, well, I guess let me ask a question. How many, I'm assuming that most of you are in F1 status, but I shouldn't make that assumption. Do we have, if you don't mind, if you feel comfortable, are any of you in J1 status, if you could raise your hand, so that I have an idea of how much I should talk about J's. Okay, we have a couple of J's. So I will focus mostly on F's, but I'll also mention something about J's as well. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about immigration because the ISSO has multiple sessions that we've advertised in our ISSO news. We have on our website, for example, coming up some sessions about employment authorization. The most common one that you'll hear is either most common ones you'll hear about are curricular practical training or optional practical training. But since we're focusing on employment after graduation, we're going to look at optional practical training here for F1 students. And then J1 students, their opportunity to train in the US would be called academic training. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So this is for F1 students, kind of a typical process for someone who is really wanting to or thinking about remaining in the US for a long time to work, or even, to stay. So students will be either in F1 or J1 status at the beginning. So many students, as you may have already know about, the F1s will apply for what's called optional practical training, which is a 12-month period where you can be employed in a job related to your major field of study. Or if you have a STEM degree, you could have the optional practical training, which is 12 months. Plus, if you have a STEM degree, you could do the STEM practical training, which is an additional 24 months for anyone who's majoring in a STEM field. For students in J1 status, the academic training is again an opportunity for you to gain training in your major field of study. And the time period for that is either it's the time period that you were actually in J1 status, or a maximum of 18 months if you were in J1 status for longer than that. Once a student has gone through that option, and we will have lots of workshops about that, and in the resources we'll tell you when they are. We also have a website, a very comprehensive website that you can go to, and we have a recorded version of our workshops, our OPT workshops and our STEM workshops that you can go to. And I recommend that you do it now. The sooner the better. The more you can empower yourself to understand this process and then to be able to sell it to your potential employers, it's going to be better for you in the end. Again, it's a matter of empowering yourself to understand what the possibilities are. Once a student, we'll just talk about Fs for now, but once a student has gone through those options, typically if they want to stay in the United States, they're going to go for one of the alphabet soup of immigration visa options that are listed below that. Those are the most common ones. We do not advise on these visas as for students. We do have a scholars office that for international people that are working at Brandeis that does work with these types of visas, but we are bringing in an immigration attorney to talk to you about these other visa options for you after optional practical training. And again, that's information we'll put in our upcoming events, but it's also all on our website and in our ISSO news. And then usually from that, those different types of visas, if someone wants to stay longer, they're going to have to get permanent residency. And that's a whole very complicated process that what it does is require what's called, most people use the word sponsorship for that. But as I said before earlier, sponsorship can have a variety of definitions in the immigration world. Any questions on that flow process? The one thing I might mention too for J's, just to know, is that this the J1 status carries with it. Well, there's two things to think about when you're in J1 status. One is, are you sponsored by Brandeis University or by another organization? And if you're not sponsored by Brandeis, everything you do will have to be cleared with your sponsor. So if you're a Fulbright or if a World Bank or any of those types of J sponsors, you're going to have to work with them directly about what happens after your degree program. And then the other thing that comes along with the J sometimes is what's called the 2-year home residency requirement. Some Js are subject to that, which can be somewhat restrictive as to what types of visas you can change to after your studies. I won't go into a lot of detail about that now, but if any of the Js that are here today have questions about it, they should definitely reach out to their ISSO advisor to learn more about that. Okay, the next slide.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Just as soon as, there we go, okay. All right, so I wanted to address some of the questions that we receive about employers and strategy behind it. But what before I begin jumping into these 7 questions, I just want to mention that the process of finding employment shouldn't be taken lightly. In fact, employment is never guaranteed. Finding employment remains a complex and challenging process that requires rigor, perseverance, sensitivity, and flexibility. So we recommend that students be intentional and strategic and to examine all options equally. And again, this is all information that we've developed to just assist, right? This is part of a larger process. And so all of these pieces are meant to really help. Yeah, okay. So who hires international students? So I wrote up a couple of pieces that I just want to read so I don't miss anything. Excuse me, so bear with me. And I know that this is a large question, and there are many different types of students here. So I'll give it my best shot. The good news for those of you who are seeking OPT is that all employers currently maintain legal authority to hire OPT students, right? There are conditions that I'm not skilled to talk to, but I believe your OPT has to be related to your degree, studying, and those kinds of things. But in short, all employers maintain authority to hire OPT students. But what we know in our conversations with employers is that they use cost-benefit analysis to determine, okay, what are the implications of recruiting, hiring, and training a student for 1 year of service? Right? So there's turnover, right? You're there for a year. And most employers aren't convinced that the benefits of this 1 year term exceed the associated costs, and oftentimes they don't hire international students. We know that they do, right? This isn't a doom and gloom presentation. So employers may find more value in hiring STEM designated students who have potentially up to 3 years of OPT eligibility. That's something that we're looking at. We have a STEM designated program, but it's relatively new and the data just isn't there yet. We also know that employers overwhelmingly hire students from science, technology, engineering, finance, in the medical industries. So those of you who are Heller students and have chosen sort of a soft science, again, those organizations are hiring. It's just that you're sort of reducing your pool of employers because they're not social sciences isn't a STEM sort of industry. Some employers, as Karen mentioned before, simply misunderstand or lack understanding of OPT. And I notice this when I'm in conversation with employers about their willingness to engage our students, and they just don't know what OPT is, or they're intimidated. Oh, I hear the word international, there are implications, and they don't have a comprehensive understanding of what OPT is. And in some cases, you will be educating employers potentially as well about that process. So I also want to mention that just because an organization may have hired in the past doesn't mean that they will in the future. And those who haven't hired, that doesn't necessarily mean that they won't. Any organization can hire you, but with small sort of boutique firms, they tend to have they're not as well financed. They're smaller, the opportunities aren't as abundant, but in those cases, you have the ability to develop a direct relationship with your supervisor, which increases your chances of sponsorship, right? If you can develop a relationship with someone and really highlight and prove your value. Big corporations, which are typically more well-funded, they have more opportunities and tend to hire and generally sponsor or hire mid-level and executives rather than recent grads. However, there are no set rules. Each situation is different and you can be the exception. So we will share some resources on how you can identify employers who do have a history of sponsorship or an employment, okay? I know that was a lot. So number 2, does the career office have a list of H-1B employers? Does ISSO? And the short answer is we don't necessarily maintain internal lists because, again, on our resources page, we're going to talk about My Visa Jobs, USCIS, Going Global, and other organizations that maintain lists of sort of employment sponsorship history, if you will. Okay. Number 3, what are employers looking for? So again, we've already mentioned the skills and how you can take self-inventory and really market yourself toward the skills. Employers, again, have communicated to us that they're more inclined to hire a sponsor for mid-career and specialized positions. As Karen mentioned, this myth is that organizations have told us time and time again that they won't, or they're less willing to hire a sponsor unless they can't find a skilled domestic candidate first. Regardless, what this means is that international candidates or applicants must present especially compelling cases in your application, right? In your resume, in your cover letter, in your interviewing, in your networking. Similarly, some employers have even told us that they value the expertise of folks, of natives in their home countries, and they tend to hire in-country staff and nationals. So depending on sort of your career goals, that may suit you. Let me see, there was a question, I think. So yes, this, as long as you have registered and checked in, the session will be sent out. Thank you. So how can ISSO and the career office help you? So, I mean, hopefully you understand the differences between our offices, but the Career Center, we can certainly help with resumes and cover letters and interviewing, networking strategies, really your search, right? If you want to review your search strategies or you're experiencing particular things, right, come into us and we can have a conversation about your search and perhaps why you're not experiencing much success, what could be changed so that you increase your chances of success. So again, it's really about, you know, those fundamental career pieces, the resume, cover letter, networking, search, interviewing, all of those sorts of pieces. Karen, do you want to say about ISSO?
Sure. So of course, what we can help you with is the immigration process. We can help you with early planning for it. We can walk you through the steps of applying for different employment benefits. We can give you guidance on the USCIS website. We have a bunch of resources listed on our website. I really recommend, if you haven't visited it recently, that you do take a look at the ISSO website, because we do have, for the employment section especially, step-by-step, very specific instructions and timelines, visual as well as written instructions on how you can apply for different employment authorizations. Each of you has your own ISSO advisor. Actually, I don't know if you know that, but based on your last name, you're assigned a specific advisor. So you're welcome to set up an appointment. We have a booking system that you can use to set up an appointment to talk with your advisor whenever they're free. You can also come into our office during walk-in hours, and you can come in during our Zoom. We have Zoom walk-in hours where you can come to a Zoom meeting to talk about different things that you have questions with. My recommendation to you is that you use the website first to get an overview, and then speak with an advisor about some of the specific questions you might have, and that you do this early so that you have time to plan, because USCIS does take a long time to process applications, so the earlier you get started, the better.
Thank you, Karen.
Mm-hmm.
Questions number 5 and 6, I'll just sort of answer together. These are questions that I often receive during the application process is, are you legally authorized to work in the US? And I can't answer that directly for you, but assuming that you have CPT or OPT, you have some sort of work authorization, Everyone's case is different, but you know if you're legally authorized to work in the US. It's not a question that I can answer for you, and it's dependent on your visa status. Another question that we receive oftentimes is a question that employers ask of you. And frankly, I find this question infuriating and unfair for a number of reasons. And the question is, will you now or in the future require sponsorship? And I argue that these are two different questions posed as one question, and your answers could, you might say yes to one and no to the other. So how do you navigate this question? So, will you now, well, assuming you have OPT or CPT and therefore you have work authorization, do you now in this moment? No. You have authorization, you can work, Will you now or in the future? Well, that's different than what you've asked, right? That's different than the first question. And so my general advice to this is it is case by case. You answer what you're comfortable answering. But say, for example, that you intend to return to your home country after OPT. Okay, will you now? No, you have authorization. Will you need it in the future? Well, no. This is settled. I'm returning home. Or maybe you don't intend to pursue full-time employment with this organization after OPT, for example. So do you now? No, you have authorization. And will you in the future? Well, no, because we're sort of ending on good terms, and you're moving forward and they're moving forward. In short, I think number 7 will help us answer this a little bit better.
I would also just add that these questions are really, really difficult because they don't really make sense.
Yeah.
So it puts you in a difficult position to try to answer them. So when you get frustrated with them, know that it's because the way the questions are presented.
Mm-hmm. So our office advises generally that it's better for you to have a conversation about these things early in the application process rather than later. Right. So if you are extended a job offer from the organization and they won't be able to hire you, that's frustrating and so many other emotions for many reasons. So approach this with sensitivity and answer as honestly as you can, and where possible have a conversation sooner rather than later. So if a company says that they don't hire international students, should I even apply? And I have many different thoughts about this. I wrote up 5. So it's a very sensitive question, which needs to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. So your educational background and work history will likely display that you're an international student. So they should be picking up on cues here. So some employers adhere to strict policies against hiring foreign nationals. Others may prefer to hire US citizens, but can be otherwise convinced. It's probably best to address the issue before the employer has spent a significant amount of time and money trying to recruit you. And usually address the issue of work status during the first or second interview, but no later than the time of the job offer. So again, when we get to the resources page, there are ways to identify employers who have a history of hiring and sponsorship. And so we would advise that, maybe focus on those employers and those organizations first, because their intentions are a little bit more clear versus moving forward with employers that it's unknown, right? It's less clear. Oh, so Emmanuel, yes.
Just one question quickly. So if an employer gave you a work organization, is there any time limit? Is there any limitation that you can work for that employer before leaving?
I'm not sure that I'm the best to answer.
Can you repeat the question, Emmanuel?
The question is, if an employer gave you a work organization, how long does it last for? Can you leave the organization at any point in time? Do they restrict you to work for them for a certain period of time?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So are you asking this question? If you get employment authorization and you start working for a company, can you leave? Is that what you're asking? Yes, you can. You can. I mean, obviously, you have to. Immigration-wise, there's no issue. I guess what you have to think about is how you're going to, and this is probably more Bryan's area than mine, but how you're going to leave your relationship with that company by doing that. And does it matter to you? You know, if you think that when you say leaving, you could give them 3 months notice, or you could, maybe they already know that you're leaving. It depends on the situation, of course, but I think it really is going to depend on your relationship and what your contract and commitment was with that company to begin with, right? Anything to add to that, Bryan?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna those are things that we could easily work through. For me, my immediate sort of anxiety is I don't know the implications, right? Like, if you're here, do you have to be like, is employment a condition of your ability to remain in the US? That I can't address, and that gives me anxiety. Like, I'm immediate like, oh no, you're gonna leave your job. What does that mean for you? So I'm like, figure that out first. We'll resolve this. But yeah.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. You will need to consider what that means. Any move that you make you'll need to consider what the immigration implications are and whether that's important to you. If you're leaving your job to go home, that's fine. But if you're leaving your job and you think you're going to remain in the US, that could be a major problem. Did that help, Emmanuel?
Okay, Karen.
So one of the things that I recommend is, to have multiple plans, about what's going to happen, because you just don't know. The dream may be to stay in the United States and work. It may not work out. Depending on what you're studying right now, you could look at several different things. You could look at another degree program. Again, that would extend your immigration status. After each level, for F1 students, after each level of degree, you're given another period of optional practical training. And I mean each level, you can't get 2 masters, but if you get a master's, you could get 12 months of OPT. And then if you get a PhD, you could get another 12 months of OPT. So for F, that's definitely a consideration, is another degree program. You can seek employment in your home country or in another country. There are many different options. The immigration regulations are different in every country, so you would have to be aware of that. But just going home initially for employment doesn't mean that you'll never get back to the United States to work. There are visa options as well that you can talk about with an immigration attorney, where you go home and work in a multinational company, and you could potentially be sent back to the United States to work in a branch office here in the US in a different visa status. So it doesn't necessarily mean that by going home, you're not ever going to work in the US. You can also, make sure that you're giving yourself as much flexibility as possible, looking for a job, not just in the New England area, for example, because you're familiar with this area now, but looking out all over the United States, being willing to move, to California or Texas or Florida, and maybe even, taking a job that, and again, this is more of Bryan's area, but maybe even taking a job that's not your dream job initially. That's a plan, that's a plan. You spend a certain amount of time there and then you move on. And again, the role of, working yourself up to a different position, I wholeheartedly believe that once they see that you are an outstanding employee, they're going to figure out a way to keep you. So that's something to think about as well. But at least have a couple of different options in case one doesn't work out.
All right. And as I mentioned, today's session is a two-part series, right? So today's session was about strategies and insight, whereas our second series is more on the comprehensive search. So that one is coming up on the 13th of March. I jumped around a little bit, but here on the right side of the screen under Heller CDO, you can see some of the international specific programming that we have coming up. One is on, mastering the resume, networking techniques, the part 2 of the Heller Career Development Office and ISSO collaboration. And then we have another clinic on the cover letter. So something that our office will wrap up this international series with is every year in the spring, this is probably my favorite program, is we assemble a panel of Heller International alum, right? So they have successfully navigated the US job search, and they will offer insight, strategies, encouragement, resources, all of the things to current students to help you all, because they were in your shoes years or months or just semesters ago. So those are some things that we have coming up from the Heller Career Office.
And I'll go through this rather quickly because I see we're at time, but to get into more detail about employment authorization, you should come to our OPT information sessions, our STEM OPT information sessions. They're going to be very informative. And then just if you want to get together with other international students and talk about vent about your difficulties in finding a job or how those crazy Americans are acting and you can't figure them out, you can always come to our coffee and tea socials, and it's a fun time. And then the immigration attorney visit is very, very good. Immigration attorneys can sometimes be expensive, but this is an opportunity to meet with one for free and ask your questions. So I recommend that too. These will all be on our website, and they're also coming out in our ISSO news.
And then quickly, I just want to leave you with these resources. I'll go into greater depth with these in our second presentation, but do know that these are resources for you. Handshake and BConnect is sort of a job search tool, if you will. These useful websites, My Visa Jobs, H-1B, Employer Data Hub, Going Global, all of those through a Handshake. So Going Global is sort of down there, will all help you identify those organizations that have a history of employment and sponsorship. So those will probably be the most utilized resources there, but I'll leave you with this for now and go into greater detail next presentation. And then finally, so for those of you who are Heller students, the session was left open to all grad students from across Brandeis. But for those of you who are from Heller, just know that, again, I'm Bryan Kanney. I work primarily with students from our global programs, whereas Jasmine works with students from our domestic programs. Appointments can be requested via Handshake. And then, of course, for any of you who are from outside of Heller, just check with your career office, because I can't speak to their organization and systems.
Yeah. I think that, we're at time, but I'm willing to say if anyone has questions. Jaylin, did you have your hand? No? Okay. I saw a hand there. No? Okay, well, thank you all for attending. I hope it was useful for you. If you have any feedback for Bryan and I, it would be great for you to share that with us so that we can improve on the session next time if there's something you'd like to see. And both of us, I'm sure Bryan can speak for himself, but I'm available for consultation at any of the times that were on our screen. So thanks again for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Good luck.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah.